Bird Box Synopsis. Bird Box follows the character of Mallory and is set during 3 different time periods: the beginning of the problem, about 5 years prior to the events at the start of the book, shortly before the birth of the 2 children, and the present day. The following synopsis is laid out in chronological order. The beginning. The story begins with Mallory standing in the kitchen, contemplating if it is finally the time to brave a journey and leave what has been her home and her 2 4-year-old children. She looks at what used to be a grand house, noting the cracks on the dishes and the horrible mess that surrounds her. She believes that the fog will give them enough protection against something that's scary enough for her to let her children stay inside the house with covered windows. Neither child has experienced the sight of a bright sky or dawn in their 4 years of existence. Over the years she has taught the children to see with their ears but feels regret for all they have missed. Finally she decides to set out on the journey, instructing the children to follow her orders and never take their blindfolds off, no matter what happens. The narrative flashes back to before the children were born. While the news about mass suicides in Russia dominates the news, Mallory is more concerned with the possibility that she is pregnant as a result of a one-night stand, especially as the man will not return her calls. Mallory's sister, Shannon, has expressed concerns about some odd reports of people abruptly going mad and brutally attacking those around them and then killing themselves, shortly after they have seen an unknown something. Mallory initially is skeptical of these incidents, but is forced to admit that this is a legitimate problem when incidents start occurring in Upper Peninsula. By this point, the visions are referred to as creatures and the situation as a whole is commonly referred to as the problem. Mallory finds herself alone when Shannon kills herself after a brief exposure outside. Mallory then finds herself with a group of survivors at a house, everyone fearful of the outside. Once there she meets Tom and 4 other survivors, Charlie, Tom, Don, and Lucy. They are soon joined by Olympia, who, like Mallory, is about 4 months pregnant. The mood in the house is tense, with mysterious sounds causing alarm. Their fear is augmented because no one is sure what to be on the lookout for, and they close their eyes or blindfold themselves if they go outside or open a door. Eventually, Tom decides to launch some expeditions to find more food and resources, and they return bearing supplies as well as disturbing findings about what has become of the world. Soon, a new person knocks on their door to be let in, Gary. They admit him, but some are wary of his demeanor and alleged history. Gary claims to have come from another refuge, having left due to the schemes of a fellow refugee, Frank. Gary describes Frank as a man who the other residents thought was mad. He kept a notebook in which he explained that the creatures were not there to harm them and that people only went insane because they were weak-minded and easily suggestible, and believed that was what was supposed to happen. Gary explains that one day Frank left with his notebook, leaving the doors open and tearing down the window drapes, exposing all of his housemates to the creatures. Mallory surreptitiously goes through Gary's belongings and finds what is clearly Frank's notebook of crazy rantings, and infers that Gary is probably Frank. Mallory confronts him and the housemates evict Gary, much to the dismay of housemate Don, over whom Gary exercises an almost Svengali-like sway. Eventually Olympia and Mallory go into labor at the same time. Gary, who has been kept hidden in the cellar by Don, takes advantage of the situation to open the doors and rip down the window covers, letting creatures into the house. The arrival of the creatures drives everyone mad except Mallory, as she keeps her eyes closed and covers the eyes of both her own and Olympia's child. Mallory has given birth to a boy, and Olympia to a girl. Moments later, Mallory hears the phone ring and manages to answer it, which connects her with a survivor named Rick. He says that he's one of 108 people living in a self-contained refuge without any windows and invites her to travel there with the infants. He gives her instructions to the refuge via the river, cautioning her that at one juncture she will have to remove her blindfold to steer onto one particular fork in the river. Mallory goes through the house and finds that everyone else is dead and that Gary has vanished. The journey to Rick's place will not be possible with 2 babies. After the birth, Mallory begins harshly training the children to automatically keep their eyes closed upon waking and to sharpen their senses of hearing so they can tell if anyone or anything approaches and pinpoint its location. She's caught some animals to let them hear their sounds in preparation for the day that they'll be ready to leave the house permanently. She calls them only girl and boy, because she feels that names are an unnecessary luxury. Mallory is now forced to forage for supplies on her own. She takes her dog Victor with her, but on one trip it sees a creature and goes mad, proving that it's not just humans who are affected by the problem. Meanwhile, she begins to plan their escape. She discovers a rowboat she can use to get to Rick's Haven, and begins awaiting an opportunity to begin the courageous act. Mallory marks the escape route and secures the boat that they'll use for the venture. Present day. Mallory travels down the nearby river for over 48 hours to try to reach safety with boy and girl. As they are rowing, there is a man convincing them to take their blindfolds off and look at the creature because it's beautiful. People who were deemed insane before are not affected by it and do not need blindfolds. They continue on until they reach a point in the river where Mallory must remove her blindfold, a concept that terrifies her, to navigate through the rapids. Despite this, she refuses to remove the blindfold and manages to guide the three of them to the refuge, where they are met by Rick. Once there, Mallory is greeted by hundreds of people in an enclosed greenhouse full of birds and greenery. She discovers that many of the people have intentionally blinded themselves and their children to survive. Mallory refuses to do the same to her kids. She is assured by Rick that this isn't forced and they have a choice.